let's resume our investigation of Nibiru. In our first installment, we did the first chapter of the book and looked at how, at least initially, the authors try to grab our attention and hook us, getting us ready to understand the game well enough to decide if we want to play it. Okay, things are going to go further in this second section. And we're going to encounter some pretty cool assets that this book has in this section. All right, so our second unit, chapter 2, opens up with a very colorful 2-page spread of our setting. That spread is on 20 and 21, and the text starts with where it all began on page 22. And we're going to go all the way into the 40s, but I'm not going to go through all the specific details because I think that's one of the things, one of the reasons why you get the book to follow along. Because as you're learning a game, as you are developing an interest in a game, how that game is going to be represented and presented by you is part of the process of interacting with it. Right? You're not going to be playing my interpretation of this game. You're going to be playing your own. Okay, so we're going to go all the way to page 40. What? Yeah, 40. There are no page numbers. 54. So, page 50, thereabouts. Okay, so where it all began opens up and gives us our first real and useful dose of setting information. And it does so in a format that we will be able to easily reference later, that we can use as a mental checklist before getting ready for play, that we can access at the table in case the direction of travel turns out to be a surprise and that sort of stuff. It is preparation for improvisation. And the writers have spent most of their time giving us information that can help us form an opinion about these places, and from that opinion, create description and interaction. But also, they have spent time to develop a sense of atmosphere from the perspective of what might someone remember about these places if they had been there, or what might someone remember about these places if they were trying to describe them to someone else, which is very much on theme and en genre for this game. This is a game, after all, a science fiction game of lost memories. And one of the things, just one of the things that the characters are out there trying to do is to reclaim these memories. So I like how rather than give us page after page after page after page of pure detail about the setting, which we then have to labor to read, understand, categorize, and remember, instead, they give us a few pages of very distinct impressions and guidelines for description. I think this is a fantastic way to go about it, not just for this setting, but as a technique on its own. So how does it do that? Well, in the first column on page 22, we have a little bit of fiction. And then we have 3 short paragraphs of context. And then we have a whole column and a little bit about 3 specific themes that need to come out in our description, in our NPC action, in our choices for our player characters, right? Because collaboration and cooperation through play to realize these environments. And I don't mean that decentralizing whatever authority, perceived or otherwise, that the game master has over presenting the setting. What I'm talking about is that this material is totally open for the players to read. They're not going to encounter surprises here. They're going to encounter things that help them understand the setting and interact with it. And through their actions, their interactions, their reactions, give it life. So where it all began is a location that is called Antumbra, and it is given contrast in its descriptions by another location that's very important called Penumbra. So Antumbra and Penumbra. So we open up with a description of Antumbra. Then it's described, the very first sentences about it are, Antumbra lies before the world's beating heart, a bastion of light where the first civilizations rose to greatness. Its city-states, with the millions toiling under the shadow of majestic arcologies, with their history flowing through Nibiru's veins, are the greatest legacy of humanity, the perfect place to tell stories of community and cohabitation. So here the authors are talking to us as players. They're talking to us as players who are game masters. They are talking to us to the ears of our characters. This is something that someone who lives there might believe. And for context about that, think about New York, right? How many aspiring filmmakers and writers choose to set their stories in places like New York, how do they describe it? The perfect place to tell stories of community and cohabitation, right? Whether those be happy stories or unhappy stories. Okay, there are very specific descriptive words used in here: steel, carapace, light, beating, because we have to remember that always, always, always the entire game is set inside this vast space station. Okay. It tells us that the core sectors are comprised of several regions, the most important of which is called Gates Shadow. And this is where most of the stories set in Antumbra will take place, and it's where the ancient sovereign states rose to prominence, and they give us a population of 20 million people. All right. So if you've been in extremely large cities, Tokyo, Beijing, Seoul, uh, Mexico City, then you have an idea of this kind of population. But how is it distributed? That's a point of difference that we need to be aware of. So I mentioned that there are themes. It presents to us three themes. Right? The first theme, the first to be presented, and the one that, let's say, feels the broadest, is the social game. Right? So this is an older society. It's set, it's established, it's organized, it's policed. There's legislature, there's tradition, there's lots of people around watching. And so if you want to get something done, violence, as might be in your group or just in the sense of role-playing games, a normal recourse to get something done, breaking the law, sneaking around, um, you know, that kind of stuff, physical violence, threats, it's not going to fly here. This is civilization. And if someone is being, treated that way or threatened in that way, they have recourse to the law to deal with the problem. So we're going to have to rely on diplomacy, interaction, you know, blackmail, who knows? Then, because of all of those conditions, because of that reality, we also have the second theme, which is the ripple effect. Now, you see how the themes are starting to work, right? The way people interact here is on a very high social level. There's a lot of social manipulation, navigation, exploration. And everything you do is seen, it's evaluated, it's understood. People talk. There is a ripple effect. Right? So what is the proper context for action? The social game. What are the consequences of any action? The ripple effect. And what is the third theme that's going to put these two other themes in motion? Right? Like they are a frame. And now we need that third thing in order to cause swing. Right? Well, the third thing is the advent of scarcity. So this is where civilization rose to prominence. This is where this vast number of people live. It's the beating heart. It's the light. It's the beacon. It's also dying. The advent of scarcity. When we get new games, one of the big questions which can push us into playing or balk us from playing is, what are we supposed to do in this game? What is this game about? What is your game about? What do the characters do? All of that. That's all the same question. It's trying to answer, why do we play? Right? For some people, there's just a blithe, oh, well, to tell an interesting story. But that needs further information. Interesting stories about what? And it's not just tell, it's discover, it's find these interactions, these desires, these reactions within ourselves so we can hear the story happen. We can recognize it in hindsight without pushing toward it, without crafting it. Or, alternately, by trying to craft it and see how it fights us, or trying to craft it and see how we all pull together to make it happen. There are so many different ways to interact within this type of game. We don't all need to play it the same way, but it is awfully helpful to think about how we could play it. And so by structuring these setting chapters in this way, a little bit of fiction, a little bit of physical context, then the themes to guide everything that's going to come out of your mouth, right? When you are in this sector, this part, this region, this community, this city state, or whatever, guide your interactions as players and game master according to these themes. And then at the end of all of that, it should feel different from the other regions that you're playing in. And so lend that quality which creates engagement, or if we're playing on an in-character level, creates that kind of immersive quality to the memory of it, to the description of it, so that in a sense it almost feels like you were there. Like you'll begin to be able to identify in-game places, fictional places, that your fictional character would like to return to or never wants to see again. This is good stuff. Also, we're still on these first two pages. Also, we have storytelling lessons here. There's a sidebar. It says, if playing in the core sectors, right, if you're going to start play in the core sectors, one of your first decisions needs to be, in which city-state will you start? And then once you've done that, which of the city-states is the closest or best match for the type of action and reaction that the characters you've created, you know, can get involved in right away. Right? So there are a number of city-states in this part of the station. Think about who the characters are. Think about who the players are. Think about how the players are talking about using their characters in this environment, and then begin play in a spot that matters to them right now, rather than working through places that matter to them less in order to get to places that matter to them more. Start them off in a place that matters to them significantly, matters to who they are as characters. Now, of course, they're going to leave that place. They're going to travel. The whole game is about exploring more of the station to uncover more and more about your identity. But if the journey is the thing, then let's make the thing interesting. So I like this. So we also are given three questions to help contextualize our characters. Is it the character's first time in an urban setting? What is the first thing the character thinks when they think of the city that they are in? And why do they think that? And what do they want the city to be like? Hmm. Okay. Lands of abundance, it's described. And then there are outback domains. It describes the skeleton of Antumbra going beyond hallways and vaults, right? And during the early days, hidden structures were discovered behind the service tunnels, and from massive power nodes and matter processing facilities to air purification facilities and fuel reserves, these locales were never meant for human life, and yet people chose to settle there, right? So what will it be like to go there into these communities? We have tail sparks in here, things that make it easy to connect to having characters in these places, such as somebody uh, needs help, so you help them, or someone is looking to hire assistance, right? They overhear conversations which connect to them in some way. Because remember, this is all social, right? The social game, the ripple effect, and the rise in scarcity. All right. We get some lore. We have some reminders of specifically what life in this particular steel nutshell is like. We talk about if we're going to be playing the social game, we need to understand the social strata. So we have the ones below and the ones above. And why are they that way? And how did they get that way? That kind of thing. What are they called? Then we have a column of fiction called A Day in the Life, which you can imagine what it's about. Then we move to a new section inside this chapter. This one is called The Players. We're now on page 26. We have three distinct things which go into the players, the movers and shakers in this environment, right? We have the dusk of curiosity, we have information pockets, and we have human displacement, right? So it's easy to remember things that are organized in three. So we've got three themes. We have three categories that inform us about the political environment in this place. And then we're hit by the first really cool visual asset in the book, which is when we get to maps. So we have kind of an abstracted region map, which once we become used to its visual shorthand, we understand what are major corridors, what are minor corridors, what are service corridors, what are vaults and things along those lines. And we get some context into how this map might be oriented on the station, but also the sense that this is just some layers of many. Just kind of cool. When we turn that page, we get to page 28 and 29, where they present us with 8 city-states. Now, the book doesn't go into detail for all of these city-states right here in this section, but we get a brief point form description so that we can compare and contrast the city-states to each other in terms of population and type of industry, religion, that sort of thing. And we have a paragraph which gives us a sense of its specific atmosphere inside the larger context we've already been talking about. So we have, like I said, we've got 8, and they're going to talk about Asher and Tarsus in great detail over the next couple of pages. We have on page 30, we have Asher, which is described as the severed kingdom. Some fantastic art in here. Then we have Asher today, or Assyria today, and the social scheme. We have tail sparks. We have images of the people who live there. And then we have a 2-page spread in a kind of aerial view of the area, which has data points on the map of where things are. And of course, we'll show that. So this is a gorgeous map. and of high functionality right in play. Then those specific places on the map are then described over the next series of pages. And each one gives us some tail sparks, but more importantly, why would anyone go there, right? So what would come up in conversation? What would they overhear in conversation? What would be the answer to a question like I need or I need to meet someone who, and then, well, you need to go to this location, right? So why would anyone go there? Who can you meet normally when you are there? Two very important descriptions to help remember and differentiate all of these distinct places from each other. It's very practical. It's built for informing your improvisation. It's built for making you mobile and agile in description and narration and choice of action and decision, rather than burying you under details which you may or may not remember, that you may or may not be able to find, and that sort of stuff. Right? It's a different type of preparation than the heavy binder and flashcards oriented format. Right? I'm not saying it's better. I'm saying it's different. It has an efficiency that appeals to me, and I'm really pleased with seeing this method carried out throughout the book. It also makes me wish that the book were a little bit larger so we get more detail of these places. But then again, I also know myself, and I'm going to be in play more interested in creating those places for myself based on the small bit of information that you know that they've already given us. So maybe my opinion about that will change in the future, and I'll say, why couldn't I uh, have more detail from from this very creative team that invented this? But these days it's inspire me and let me go. Anyway, so each area, brief description, why go there, who to meet, and that's carried out with more and more inspiring art all the way up until we get to the next zone, the torus, and that works the same way that we've talked about already, right? And we have this huge fold-out map, right? Page after page after page unfolds, and we'll show that as well, which gives us greater context and greater ability to be able to translate vision into description. Okay. That brings us to the end of chapter 2. So, what has Nibiru done for us? So, we understand that we're in a station, chapter 1. We understand that we're playing vagabonds and what it means to be a vagabond. Chapter 2, we understand, or chapter 1, we understand how the game is to be approached as a role-playing game, right? And we're given to understand the kind of the narrative push that casts our characters out into wanting to or needing to explore the station. Therefore, chapter 2 puts solid ground under our feet by preparing us to think about all the locations that we're going to encounter as places with distinct atmosphere. We're not going to bother to describe them as separate unless they can be described or unless they feel different. We get used to the idea of describing large sections of the station as presenting themes, and we get used to the idea of organizing factions inside the social structures of a place according to core beliefs. And we get used to the idea of how these places look and feel and smell and sound within the context of being inside a space station. Metal, steel, rust, power conduits, power plants, lights, pulses, beats, recycling of air. So, if by the end of chapter 2 we're not gripped and wanting to go forward to know more, then we've had an enjoyable read and can present it not only as interesting for someone else who might like it, but we can also learn a lesson about organizing information for retention as a game master, for effective interaction as players, and get a sense of how those things can collide and then achieve collaboration as preparation supports improvisation. Anyway, see you next time with Chapter 3.